Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I begin tonight by quoting from the Weekend Financial Review. I'm sure people will be wary of becoming part of the coalition of the irrelevant, where they just say no and there's nowhere for us to go, said Treasurer Joe Hockey. That just makes them all irrelevant. They will not have any influence on policy and on legislation, Mr Hockey said. The coalition of the irrelevant. Is this how our coalition negotiates the budget? Is this how our Treasurer wins the battles for hearts and minds in the Senate and the Australian people, with abuse and derision and threats of a double dissolution? What Treasurer Hockey apparently doesn't understand is that those of us on the crossbenches and those new senators who will join us have been working tirelessly on this family-bashing budget which he and his cohort have put together. On the 29th of May, I met with the Prime Minister after having initiating costs to be undertaken by the Parliamentary Budget Office. The aim of this is to formulate a number of preliminary budget strategies on which to base any future negotiations on. These included increasing the deficit levy by 1%, as well as changes to budgetary issues surrounding education, health, family and welfare are palatable. I have met with Minister Hunt regarding the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and other matters related to the carbon tax. I've met with other ministers in their respective portfolios to discuss election promises and budget measures. And every time my message has been the same: I want to find the best result for Australians and Australia's future. I am reluctant to make policy announcements tonight. I am still working through the details. But what I will say is that I am not prepared to horse trade. I am prepared to negotiate with the government to find the savings needed to get the budget back in the black. But I won't be bludgeoned into selling out those people who can least afford cuts. I'm not going to sell out the most vulnerable in our society. Madam Acting Deputy President, so far I have a clear impression of the government's approach to this budget. It is not interested in finding workable solutions. It's not interested in compromise. Only a few hours ago I received briefing information on several bills which will be introduced into the Parliament. All up, they equate to around 650 pages, and this is just 4 bills out of more than a dozen that will come across the Senate in ensuing weeks. This should really shine a light on how impractical their approach is to consultation and negotiation. It was on the 29th of May that Minister Dutton was quoted in the Medical Observer on the topic of the need for Senate crossbenchers to work with the government to find a workable solution to this bad budget. He gave 2 options, and I quote, "The first option is the Greens option, which is to block everything and negotiate on nothing, essentially to be an obstructionist. The second model is somebody who is willing to add or improve in their eyes the policy that's before them." The irony here is, it seems, that the government has chosen option 1 themselves. That is, not to negotiate and to block any attempt at improvement. I don't understand how Mr Dutton can be so confident that the Medicare co-payments will go through, considering that over 25% of Australians have one federal concession card or another. How can he think the co-payments in their current form are reasonable and affordable? I don't understand how Mr Hockey and Senator Cormann think a 2% deficit levy is high enough for those on incomes over $180,000. When I first heard I'd be paying 2%, I thought I'd be paying around $4,000. Turns out it'll be closer to $200. This is a joke. I don't understand how Senator Abetz thinks it's reasonable to not recognise formal study in higher education as work when calculating the New Start waiting period. I don't understand how they expect some people to live for 6 months without payment, even when they want to work. I don't understand how Mr Pyne thinks now is a good time to be introducing his ideologically driven education policy. I don't understand how asking students to pay more for courses and then telling them that the interest rate will be increased is a good idea. I don't understand how the government is prepared to rip up thousands of dollars from families at a time when families are doing it tough, when the government wants families to pay more for fuel, more for visiting the doctor, all the while expecting an economic downturn with huge predicted job losses across so many sectors. This is impractical, illogical and bizarre. I could go on all night with examples of how the government confuses me, however it will do little good. I challenge the government tonight. If you're serious about getting the nation back on track, then begin dialogue with the crossbench. Stop using families as a punching bag. Let's have a meeting. Let's sit down and discuss common ground more than just a couple of days out from when we are expected to vote on legislation. I'm not going to horse trade. The Australian people deserve better than that. The DLP calls on the government to man up and get real. We won't be bludgeoned, we won't be hijacked, we won't be taken for fools.